Hello and welcome to this virtual session. We're glad you can join us today. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items we'd like to go over with you now. Firstly, you can resize the webinar windows to cater to your viewing preferences. You can maximize, minimize, and drag the windows to your preferred viewing size. If you look at the bottom middle of your screen, you can click on the widgets that you'll need to get the most out of this virtual experience. Secondly, Microsoft specialists are on hand to answer your questions in real time. So feel free to type in your questions using the Q&A window and we'll answer them as soon as we can. Lastly, we've provided some additional resources for you to supplement your learning. You can access them by clicking on the links in this section. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our speakers.
Hi, my name is Aidan Gunitelker. I'm a technical trainer here at Microsoft and I'd like to welcome you to Microsoft's Azure Virtual Training Day, Linux OSS database migration event. During this event, we're going to cover 6 modules over 2 parts. In part 1, we cover the first 3 modules. Module 1 explains how to choose the right migrations, modernization, and optimization approaches for Linux. In Module 2, you'll learn about managing, automating, and scaling up your Linux environment with Azure and third-party services. Module 3 explains how to optimize cost savings with Linux on Azure. In part 2 of this event, we start with Module 4, where you'll learn about migrating and optimizing MySQL databases to Azure. Module 5 covers migrating and optimizing Postgres databases to Azure. Finally, we wrap up with Module 6, migrating and optimizing MongoDB and Cassandra with Cosmos DB. Let's get started with the first module, choosing the right migration, modernization, and optimization approaches for Linux. We'll be covering a few key areas for this module: evaluating a migration to the cloud, overview of Linux and open source databases on Azure, the Cloud Adoption Framework, and Azure Migrate and Leveraging Azure Migration and Modernization Program, otherwise known as AMMP in the migration process. So let's begin with evaluating a migration to the cloud. The pace of technology advances is accelerating at an unprecedented rate. Breakthrough innovations are causing the volume of data to explode. So data from sensors, social media, apps, and data found across the enterprise. The scale of economics of cloud computing makes it possible to capture and harness data, creating new and exceptional opportunities for people and organizations to innovate, grow faster, and achieve more than ever before. Organizations have the chance to fundamentally redefine the way they engage customers, transform products, optimize operations, and engage employees. But as economies become more interdependent, large-scale events such as wars, recessions, or the COVID-19 pandemic can introduce volatility and uncertainty to global markets. How businesses respond in time of uncertainty is as varied as the businesses themselves. Many will slow down, operations will operate more cost efficiently, while others may lean into new opportunities that may not have otherwise existed. Across this entire spectrum, the ability to cost-effectively adapt and scale to rapidly changing conditions and managing the underlying risk is paramount. We see a number of concrete reasons that affect the timing of migration projects. The overall goal is to increase speed and create new options for the business. But the process from moving from an on-premises infrastructure to cloud infrastructure has some specific triggers. Customers might have external events that influence decisions, such as an acquisition, or technology-based events such as the end of support or the need to refresh hardware. Security and compliance has now become drivers for cloud migration because cloud technologies enable businesses to respond faster to evolving threats. Or our customers might be looking at a higher-level strategy that requires application modernization. The need to cost-effectively adapt and scale applies to digital transformation too, as organizations make decisions to either pause, slow down, or accelerate their journeys to the cloud. Companies that embrace the pace of change and manage the risk of adopting cloud services can see substantial improvements in the time to market, growth, and overall efficiency. When making the decision to migrate, we also need to think about the best way to move forward. As we can see from this flowchart, we can choose from either a full migration to Azure or a hybrid approach to migration, based on if the data we're migrating can move to Azure or not. For customers looking to retire their data centers, get access to limitless scale, and have a fully managed service with published SLAs, we have Azure SQL Database. For customers who are looking for a hybrid approach ranging from server-based workloads to consistency and manageability across on-prem and multi-cloud, and even small streaming-enabled SQL databases, we have a range of services available from SQL Server to Kubernetes clusters and Azure IoT Edge. Microsoft Azure is the cloud that lets you turn ideas into solutions with more than 100 services to build, deploy, and manage applications in the cloud, on-premises, and at the edge, using the tools and frameworks of your choice. Our track record of continuous innovation supports your development today and your visions for tomorrow. We are continuously launching capabilities in the platform, helping our customers be future ready. The cloud is moving fast. Every week, a new technology is coming out. So it's about meeting new capabilities now and investing in those in the horizon. In Azure, you can take advantage of open source in the cloud. Azure also allows for seamless migration of Linux workloads, support for modern development including Azure's Kubernetes services, a choice of open source databases including MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB, compatibility with the latest open source extensions and tools, and a large community-driven developer network. Nothing is more important than trust, particularly when you're talking about the cloud. We spend over $1 billion in cybersecurity with 3,500 cybersecurity engineers who are continuously monitoring your data for threats. We've invested ahead of the curve with layers of security with built-in controls to protect the data and close the gaps that attackers can exploit. Trust your workloads to Azure, built upon the most secure cloud with the broadest compliance coverage. Azure has huge momentum in open source, with greater than 60% of VM cores being Linux, greater than 60% of Azure Marketplace images being Linux-based, greater than 47,000 customers using Azure open source databases, and greater than 100,000 Azure Data Studio instances with Azure's open source database extensions. There is a wide open source ecosystem for every type of workload. Azure has best-in-class Linux and container infrastructure with seamless migration to Linux and container offerings and a native Linux and Azure experience. You have a choice of open source databases including MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB, hybrid available anywhere with over 60 Azure regions, and it's built for existing Linux investments. With that, let's move into the next lesson, overview of Linux and open source databases on Azure. As you can see, there are a wide range of Linux and open source databases available on Azure, with first-class support, including integrated support, compute options for different workloads, and the monitoring built in, while being cost-efficient and secure. Some specific things to be aware of. There are over 50% of Azure VM cores that are running Linux, and we're continuously investing more in the Linux and open source world to make sure that the experience of running the Linux-based workloads are seamless. Also, being a neutral technology provider, we have a strong partnership with Linux distro publishers like Red Hat, SUSE, and Canonical to build co-developed applications and an Azure-tuned kernel. And we jointly support our customers when they choose to run their Linux workloads on Azure so they can enjoy one ticket to a nice solution experience. The majority of our customers' workloads run on top of Linux, and our top enterprise customers trust Linux on Azure for their workloads. Azure provides a wide open source ecosystem for every workload with end-to-end support and product integration. Azure fully supports common Linux distributions, provides scale for Linux images, contains fully managed cloud database services, provides familiar tools and support for existing software and hardware, and provides the ability to create your own Linux VMs and deploy and run containers in Kubernetes. Azure also provides best-in-class Linux and container infrastructure, with support for Azure partners in the Linux ecosystem through joint partnerships for support and solutions, native Linux experiences with enhanced capabilities through managed container offerings and more, cost-effective options for all workloads with flexible payment options, including pay-as-you-go and bring your own license, and built-in security, manageability, and governance with automatic patching and updates. With support and the ecosystem around Linux and Azure, you can unleash the full potential of your Linux-based workloads with specialized mission-critical and business-critical infrastructure in the Azure cloud, with supported infrastructure for VMware, Cray, SAP, and NetApp. The end-to-end Linux on Azure experience is supported through the combination of support and partnerships, services available across the entire stack from image building to support and troubleshooting, and backed by a solid Azure foundation of reliability, high availability, performance, and security. Our investment in end-to-end Linux experience includes two major chunks. At the core, the bottom, is the Azure Foundation. We're investing greatly in getting the fundamentals like performance, reliability, security, and resiliency to benefit everyone using Azure. Then we have the full stack view from kernels to workloads and how customers experience licensing, operations, patching, and support. We've been investing greatly at every aspect of this experience, or identifying where we could do better. Azure's open source database services require minimal admin of MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB workloads, focusing on lower operating costs for high availability that you can track with the total cost of ownership calculator. Built-in intelligence for optimized performance and security, enterprise-level scaling with hyperscale, which allows you to scale PostgreSQL across hundreds of nodes, secure and compliant with laws and regulations across the world, and are integrated with Azure services with a streamlined experience. Some examples of open source databases available in Azure include Azure's database for PostgreSQL, which provides scale-out single nodes with high performance, Azure database for MySQL with high availability and elastic scaling with a managed community database service, Azure database for MariaDB, which provides a choice in languages and frameworks, Azure Managed Instance for Apache Cassandra, which can help modernize your existing Cassandra data clusters, and Azure Cache for Redis, which provides support for fast, scalable applications with an in-memory data store. Database migrations to Azure are simplified through the use of Azure Database Migration Service, which can help with on-prem and IaaS open source apps while reducing downtime on large or critical databases. You have a variety of options available, which we'll be taking a look at in later modules. Now let's take a look at the Cloud Adoption Framework. The Cloud Adoption Framework, otherwise known as the CAF, is proven guidance that's designed to help you create and implement the business and technology strategies necessary for your organization to succeed in the cloud. It provides a full lifecycle framework and includes best practices, documentation, and tools that cloud architects, IT professionals, and business decision makers need to successfully achieve their short and long-term objectives. By using CAF, organizations are better able to align their business and technical strategies to ensure success. This is done through the steps: define strategy, plan, ready, adopt, govern, and manage. The Cloud Adoption Framework provides strategy advice for acceleration of migration with support for each step. Simply put, you should document the business strategy, align your partner support, gather data and analyze assets and workloads, make a business case, create a migration plan, build a skills readiness plan, deploy and align a landing zone, migrate your first 10 workloads, hand off production workloads to cloud governance, and hand off production workloads to cloud operations. When assessing applications for migration or modernization, using the 5 R's of rationalization is useful. Can we rehost via a lift or shift migration? Can we refactor our application to fit a PaaS-based model? Can we re-architect older application architecture to function in the cloud? Can we rebuild our application in the cloud? And finally, can we replace our application with a SaaS version? Next up, let's take a look at Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate contains a suite of integrated tools that can help you with your migration process. Azure Migrate Server Assessment can help assess servers by discovering and assessing on-premises VMware, Hyper-V, and physical virtual machines and servers. Azure Migrate Server Migration helps to migrate servers, including VMware, physical, and other virtualized and public cloud VMs and servers to Azure. Data Migration Assistant provides assistance with assessing on-premises databases for migration to Azure, specifically helping you to recognize issues that block your migration, including unsupported features. Azure Database Migration Service assists with migrating on-premises databases to Azure, targeting services like Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, and SQL and Azure VM. Mivera helps to assess servers, providing performance-based right-sizing, cost planning, and dependency analysis. Web App Migration Assistant assesses on-premises web apps and helps to migrate to Azure, with .NET and PHP web apps supported. Lastly, Azure Data Box migrates offline data with a focus on easily migrating large amounts of data to Azure. Azure Landing Zones help to provide a scalable, modular approach to building out a common set of design areas. Implementing a landing zone can go a long way to assisting you with your migration, from deploying a first application to performing a large amount of workloads. The first design area to look at is enterprise enrollment, where you will be focusing on ensuring enterprise customers with multiple tenants have those tenants created correctly. Identity is also an important focus, making sure that you have a consistent identity infrastructure that is implemented. Network topology and connectivity should be configured appropriately for workloads. Resource organization is also important, making sure that you have the appropriate subscriptions and management design. Additionally, make sure that you've implemented governance disciplines, including automating, auditing, and enforcing security, governance, and compliance policies. Have a solid operations baseline, including inventory, monitoring, update management, and resource configuration. Set up disaster recovery with backup recovery and high availability as priorities. And lastly, deployment options is the last design area to confirm, where you should have the appropriate tools and templates to deploy your landing zones. Let's continue with leveraging Azure Migration and Modernization program in the migration process for our last lesson for this module. The AMMP helps accelerate migrations to the cloud with additional support throughout each stage of the process. You'll be able to get fast-tracked to Azure engineers to help you plan your move, get access to expert partners who are migration and modernization experts, and build your organization readiness and cloud skills via Microsoft Learn and accredited partners. Additionally, you will get support for infrastructure and database migration to move your workloads to the cloud efficiently and by optimizing costs, quickly migrating your Windows desktops and apps with Azure Virtual Desktop, and getting access from anywhere. Also, you can modernize apps and data to optimize for cost and performance. That was a lot to take in. We learned that a well-planned cloud migration that will be more successful than ad hoc migration. And we learned that we can take advantage of Azure's first-class support for Linux workloads. We also looked at accelerating migration through the Cloud Adoption Framework, ensuring our Azure environment is prepped via landing zones, and by using the Azure Migration and Modernization program to get help on challenging workloads. In this demonstration, we're going to be taking a look at Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. This helps us to provide guidance and best practices to help us adopt the cloud and achieve our business outcomes. In the framework, it is separated into different sections, including strategy, planning, readiness, migration, innovation, security, management, and governance. For example, if we look at the Ready section and take a look at the landing zone conceptual architecture, we can have a look at what is an Azure landing zone, something to help us migrate our resources to the cloud. We can also take a look at the different features of the landing zone, including platform versus application landing zones. We can take a look at the architecture involved in building a landing zone. And we can also take a look at some templates that are available to us in order to help us get started with landing zones as well. This is just one of the sections in the Cloud Adoption Framework, but today we're going to be taking a look at some of the assessments which will help us to get started with Azure. So if we scroll up to the top and we go to Architecture, let's take a look at Assessments. And under Assessments, we are going to be having a look at the Cloud Adoption Strategy Evaluator. So let's take a look. Right here, it says, assess your cloud adoption strategy and get recommendations on building and advancing your cloud business case. So if you go ahead and take a look here, we immediately get presented with a form. And this form asks us to give us an assessment name. We'll just leave this as it is right now. We're going to take a look at the interests. So right here, we'll take a look at things like, are we going to identify our motivations, documenting our business outcomes, and so on. What we'll do is that we're going to be taking a look at financial considerations, documenting our business outcomes that we expect, and technical considerations. When we click Start, we're going to go ahead and answer the questions that come to us. So for the first one, what are the business outcomes driving your cloud transformation? We're going to go with increased profitability, accelerate sales, and retain customers. Do these outcomes have an associated business drivers, KPIs, and necessary technical capabilities? Yes. Have you developed a financial model or performed an economic assessment that provides business justification for moving to the cloud? Yes. It's important to understand how to account for cloud costs before you begin your cloud transformation journey. Select your company's model from the following common cloud accounting models. So for this one, we're going to go with the cost center model. Now from here, it'll give us a checklist in order to consider the technical aspects of our business case. So if we go through, make sure you take your time and understand each of the questions. For this demonstration, we're going to go through and put them in an order that I've decided previously. So yes, 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 no, yes, no, yes, no, and yes. And then when we take a look at the guidance, it gives us our recommendations to improve our cloud adoption strategy. So we can see here that it gives us an answer summary of all the information that we've put in. But if you look under the guidance, we can take a look at our overall results, the categories that have influenced our results, and then additional resources that help us to get started with moving to the cloud, like our Azure Virtual Machine Cost Estimator, a Cloud Adoption Plan template, and our pricing calculator. So further down, we can even take a look at recommendations that have been given to us based on the answers that we have provided in the assessment. So for documenting business outcomes you expected, we can take a look at things like basic concepts of physical outcome conversations are around revenue, cost, and profit, and we can read more here, taking a look at driving market change, and even responding to user needs. So if we have a desire to look further at these recommendations, we can click on one of these and take a bit of a look at some of this information that is provided to us. Additionally, if we go back to this, we can also take a look at any unanswered questions or things that have not been assessed. So if you've decided that you want to go back and maybe assess other aspects of your readiness plan, you can take a look at them from here. Now let's take a short break. We'll see you on the other side.